All right, what up, what up? Episode number 2 of the Retro Review, and because it rhymes, you know it's true. My name is Ryan Rainbow, and with me, as always, is Ricardo Jimenez. Today, we're tackling 1994's ECW, The Night the Line Was Crossed, and not even Extreme Championship Wrestling, Eastern. Eastern Championship Wrestling, before they got the E out and put it back in with a different word. I'm pretty excited to talk to you about this show, mainly because I know you know a lot more about it than I do. So I feel like I'm going to learn along with the listeners, which is, hey, say that sentence 5 times fast. Learn along with the listeners about some ECW history and about the history of some of these performers. Rick, how you doing, man?
So, in all actuality, I guess maybe just jumping the gun, I wasn't even watching ECW when this show aired. The only thing I knew about ECW in '94 was what I read about it in Pro Wrestling Illustrated. So, I had only seen this show start to finish one other time before we watched this. We actually watched this together when you were in New York. And one of us paid attention to it, and one of us did not.
I don't know which is which, to be honest with you. But an interesting thing about this show for me right off the bat is I always thought that the event referred to as the night the line was crossed was when Shane Douglas, the ECW champion at the time, throws down the NWA championship and says that he doesn't want that title or that tradition or whatever. But now the event that we're going to talk about, that's actually the night the line was crossed, was it originally billed as that? Like when it came out, was it called like was it tune in this Sunday for the night the line was crossed, or was that something retroactively tagged onto it?
No, that was retroactively tagged onto it for the VHS cassette dubbed blank tape, probably on Polaroid or Fuji cassette because they were the cheapest at the time. And it was because at the time, a three-way match in America was like unheard of, let alone, I'll just, keep jumping ahead. A 60-minute time limit draw with Terry Funk, who was a living legend already, Shane Douglas, who had short WCW and WWF runs and was kind of this um, emerging powerhouse on the independents, as well as Sabu, who was at that point more known as the original Sheik's nephew, but was making all sorts of headlines all over the magazines just because he was innovative because he was using the ropes as springboards, which sounds so like yeah, what, who gives a shit now. But in the early '90s it was very rare. Plus he was so, I don't want to say dangerous, but he gave across a very dangerous vibe and an overly violent vibe, even more so than Terry Funk back then. So you had three very, very different type of wrestlers coming from three different, upbringings, um, and it turned into this match that really drew tons of attention to ECW. Beforehand, ECW was, and it's easy to say this in retrospect, but we're looking in even further retrospect. But even in the late '90s or the mid '90s, when I became aware of ECW, this event was the thing that made ECW stand apart and not seem like just another independent promotion or regional promotion at the time, is what we were still calling them. But it's funny with all that said and how big of a deal this show was, and the dubbed cassettes sold like crazy and were bootlegged as much as a Metallica demo. This show is the most early '90s independent looking show of all time, aside that made it onto TV and distribution and such, but wasn't on network television. It rivals Ice. I don't know. Fuck. I don't remember if it was ICW or IWA Wrestle Slam, which was some shitty independent promotion that had sparse TV on Sports Channel, which was like the B level ESPN back in the day, and it was all uh, never has been, never would be wrestlers or complete, you know, has-been at the time. I don't want to say that, to be super derogatory, but essentially the main event of that WrestleSlam show was a new version of Demolition. It was Axe and Crash. Who's Crash? Some fat guy. It's not Crush and it's not Smash, it's Crash. I think there's another, Demolition member that was, got sued a bunch on the independents, and he had some other type of fake Demolition name. But this show is really, really different watching it now than it was the first time I saw this, which was, maybe 17 years ago. But I'm assuming 17 years ago, 2002 or so. I think the first time I saw this actually was 2000, 99 or 2000. So it's 20 years ago was the first time I saw this. But
yeah, the most interesting part about this show is thinking about it retrospectively in a couple different ways. One, like you said, some of the stuff that at the time would have been revolutionary, as far as using the ropes as a springboard, it being a three-way match. They're things that we take for granted this deep into wrestling's history. So it's interesting to see those origins and kind of to put yourself in a mindset of like that. I always think about the movie Pulp Fiction. Okay, Pulp Fiction, obviously an awesome movie. I didn't see Pulp Fiction until 2014 in its entirety, like start to finish. I would always see pieces of it. And by then I had seen all these other Tarantino movies, right? So I kind of already had seen him perform these tricks that he does in Pulp Fiction that he more or less originated in that and might even do better in that movie, but it wasn't as huge of a deal. And I always think about, wow, if I would have saw Pulp Fiction in 94, I'm sure my mind would have been blown. And that's kind of what I think about this. On the other hand, the show is objectively, I mean, let's be real, it's bad, right? There's a lot of bad things on here, but there's also a lot of people that we now know went on to be huge stars that were nothing in 94. So it's kind of cool to see it in that aspect of, almost seeing like these borderline home movies of these kids growing up to be big time stars, between Tommy Dreamer, Taz, Mike Awesome, a young upstart named Jimmy Snuka. We got different people like that go on to be somebody. So I thought that was cool for both of those perspectives of looking back and thinking, oh, wow, I bet this was a big deal at the time. And also looking back and being like, wow, this definitely sucks, but it's cool that you know what came later.
Yeah, that definitely is an interesting take on it. Because, like I said, even the first time I saw this show, it was years after it aired, but it had been this legendary thing for so long. But it was before the internet, so it took me a while to track down the tape. Plus, it wasn't a thing that I was like, oh my god, I need to see this tape. I'd heard so much about it, and there was so much other ECW at the time, and they did recaps constantly on ECW TV of old stuff, especially the main event. So it wasn't like it was this burning thing that I needed to accomplish tracking down one of these tapes. But so yeah, like I said, like you said, and like I said before, there's three different viewpoints of it. But the one we're going to talk about the most today is our viewpoint 2019, which is very, very funny because the way that the show opens, or the video cassette, which has now been transferred to the World Wrestling Entertainment Network streaming channel, is Todd Gordon in this really, really cool looking, ultra obviously fake office. They hung a fucking map on the wall to be like, oh, what does an office of a big wrestling promotion look like? Oh, it has a map on it. You know what else is behind there? A fucking computer. The world's first computer where the screen is green and the type is all in capitals and it's that neon yellow. But so Todd Gordon was he fucking owned the promotion in the beginning, and his on-air role was the commissioner. And I didn't put this together. I don't know if anybody ever gave a shit about this, but or if this was intentional. I feel like it had to be. I never thought about it till somewhat recently. Commissioner Gordon, like fucking Batman.
Yeah, that's really funny. It's also funny because, when I think of ECW, or when anybody thinks of ECW for that matter, we think of Paul Heyman being not only the person in charge behind the scenes, but also he was an on-screen character so often. So to have Todd Gordon, Commissioner Gordon, be on here and giving this little speech, and so he must have filmed this, of course, after the event, right? Because he's hyping it up, like, wow, this show was crazy.
Yeah, this was for the the home video release.
So the show opens with Mr. Hughes, who tell us a little bit about Mr. Hughes for those of us that might not know.
Well, Mr. Hughes is like the cool version of what Private Party is, which means a wrestler wearing sunglasses into the ring and wrestling with the sunglasses, but his stay on and Private Parties fall off.
Well, I would say a cool version of Private Party would be the Street Profits. But yes, we got Mr. Hughes, and now Mr. Hughes didn't he also do some work in Smoky Mountain?
Mr. Hughes, he kind of did work everywhere in the late 80s and early 90s. My first exposure to Mr. Hughes was I don't remember if it was the September or the November 1990 Clash of the Champions in WCW when he was the Big Cat, which is interesting because there was already Big Cat Ernie Ladd, but they've reused gimmicks and names, I feel like, in the 80s and 90s from the 70s and the 80s all the time because there wasn't so much documentation of everything. There could be a 4-year gap and you could, reuse a name or reuse a gimmick and people wouldn't really, it wouldn't be a big thing. Whatever. So Mr. Hughes, so the Big Cat was in WCW and he was a threat to Lex Luger and that went absolutely nowhere. Disappeared from TV for less than a year, reappears as Mr. Hughes, which is, the gimmick where he's in the suit and the glasses, and he was a bodyguard to Harley Race, who was then, had just become Lex Luger's manager. I don't recall if Mr. Hughes ever wrestled as Mr. Hughes in WCW up until that point. He may have, but I don't recall. My 1991 is a little sketchy because my VCR broke December 31st, 1990, and I didn't get a new one until Christmas 1991. So I watched so much wrestling in 1991, but I didn't record any of the TV. So my memory on some of the TV is shaky, which everybody was dying to know about that. He reemerges in WWF in 93, and I guess his gimmick is that he's just a badass former bodyguard, wrestles in a shirt and tie and suspenders and glasses. He had a couple of, he ran the house show loop, I know, with Macho Man. I actually saw Mr. Hughes and Giant Gonzalez face off against Macho Man and The Undertaker at Madison Square Garden on June 12th, 1993, which was the day before King of the Ring 93. It was billed as a tag team war. And I also remember that day because that was the first day that I saw Beavis and Butthead. So he did some work in Smoky Mountain Wrestling also, which I don't know if that was before, during, or after this show, because this show being early 94, he must have been all over the place.
Well, he faces Sal Bellomo. Now, the only thing that I really knew about Sal before this was I remember watching it was like a compilation of Piper's Pit segments, and Bellomo comes out for an unscheduled appearance, and Roddy Piper goes, "What are you doing here? I didn't order a pizza." And that's all I know about Sal. So the pizza delivery man, which, you know what? I don't know that we've ever seen a Keno from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles gimmick in wrestling, so probably something that we shouldn't be overlooking and should be cashing in on. The Indies can have that one for free. I'm sure AEW has one, so I don't know why I'm saying that. But Mr. Hughes and Sal, I mean, this is just a squash match. Mr. Hughes annihilates him like Roddy Piper did verbally in just a couple minutes. And I thought Hughes was cool looking in this.
Yeah, Hughes is always cool looking. He was really fat here. But yeah, this was like, there's not really much to say about this, but there's a ton to say about this. First off, what the fuck is Bellomo's gimmick? He looks like a Norman the Lunatic version of the Viking Raiders, and he's throwing out popcorn from Santa's bag or some shit. This is weird as hell.
Well, we also need to talk about how another thing about this show is pretty sure the whole thing is filmed on one camera.
Yeah, I'm almost positive this was either a 1 or 2 camera shoot, and it seemed like whenever it does change from that wide angle, it might almost just be some type of editing glitch to make it seem like. I don't remember that at all from my initial viewing of this, it being a one camera shoot. But like I said, when I saw this first time, it must have been the late 90s, early 2000s. And I don't think I was as, I don't want to say nitpicky, but yeah, I guess I can say I wasn't as nitpicky about things as I am now. Um, I like that it's a short squash, which is fine. Hughes is cool. The canvas all taped up is disgusting and very early 90s indie show. So there you have it.
So after that, we see the Sandman and Tommy Cairo facing the Rockin' Rebel and Pitbull #1 in a dog collar chain tag team match. Now, Sandman, of course, not fully developed into the Sandman that we know, but there's definitely shades of it, I would say. So we know him to be a big part of Extreme Championship Wrestling just a couple years later, probably even a couple months later, right? And the Pitbull #1, of course, part of the Pitbulls. Rockin' Rebel, was he later on part of ECW?
He stuck around for a while, but he never did anything ultra important. But he was there. I almost feel bad calling him a jobber. I don't know why I feel bad. Maybe because he stuck around for so long. But I mean, he was essentially a jobber. But he was there even through some parts of '97, if memory serves. What the fuck is his gimmick? Is he's supposed to be like a rocker, right? So it's like I'm just like a rebel who rocks. I assume that's what it is because it's not like he was wearing a Confederate flag or anything. Gary Wolf being just the Pitbull as opposed to Pitbull 1 or part of the Pitbulls is it's something. It's not really that interesting, I guess. I can't believe Sandman ever did this gimmick. Like, oh, I'm the Sandman because like I love going to the beach and it's sandy. Like it's so strange that at any point, knowing what he became and knowing what is known about his real personality, that seems like almost any other gimmick in the entire world would have made more sense with him.
It's also interesting that he holds on to that name throughout his career because he even had like that weird like pimp gimmick in between this and the version of the beer chugger and kendo stick swinger that we know, right?
I don't remember that.
Yeah, because one of his prostitutes was Nancy Benoit.
Oh, okay, all right. Yeah, I guess I never thought about it that much. Like he's straight up a pimp, as opposed to
No, I mean he had hoes. He was like the Godfather. So that's funny that the WWF used the Godfather and Stone Cold Steve Austin. Not that either of them were, not that he was nearly as good at either of those gimmicks as those people ended up being. But for years that was, oh, Stone Cold ripped off the Sandman, which I'm pretty
no,
sure
he was as good.
Okay, yeah, he was twice as good. Sandman, of course, also a former Juggalo Championship Wrestling champion, so not to be overlooked on his myriad of accomplishments later on in life. But yeah, this match is very short as well, and thank God because the whole dog collar thing really immediately was like kind of a turnoff for me. But again, a cool thing about this is that even though it's really crappy, you get to see a glimpse into a future star in the Sandman, and I guess you could call Pitbull a future star, right? He's
Yeah, especially in ECW. He definitely has quite a little segment of the history, at least if for nothing else, the whole Shane Douglas broken neck angle.
Sure.
But in this, the fighting in the stands, especially with the collars and the chains, was such a big deal. And everybody bleeding, all the fucking juice flowing so early. This is very un-American in 1994. So that's the type of thing that it's like, oh yeah, they're bleeding a bit. It's ECW. Like, oh, they're in the crowd. Oh, it's wrestling. But at the time, it's the second match and there's blood. It's the second match and it's a stipulation match. And they're fighting in the crowd. What the fuck? But it's crazy. Well, I mean, it's not crazy because it's over 20 years old. It's coming up on 30 years old. But it also seems, for me at least, it doesn't seem like it was that long ago that for something so minuscule like fighting in the crowd to be so passe now. Like it's just, all right, well, you could watch Raw and 3 matches on the show could fight to the crowd. And it's like, oh, yeah, cool, they're in the crowd. Like, it's only going to be a big deal if somebody, throws Shane McMahon off of the Empire State Building onto a table.
Speaking of the crowd, though, I think it's important to point out also about this show is that in addition to, of course, us seeing these people that would go on to be stars, a big part of it is we're seeing this whole organization, this federation, Eastern Championship Wrestling. We go on to see the Extreme Championship Wrestling, and this show actually takes place in what they would call the ECW arena. Do they even call it the ECW arena on this show? It's the same building, though, that they would
Yeah, they
go
were
on to.
calling it that by now.
So, it's interesting that this crowd is also witnessing the birth of everything. They were there probably before and then went on to be part, almost like an NXT crowd would be for now, years ago, being part of those early Hulu episodes, and now they're on USA Network. So I think that's an important part to mention, just that the crowd is the same building that they went on to make their mark in.
Yeah, and that building is legendary, and it's really cool to see the difference. I mean, there's a lot of difference, especially the production, but even seeing the difference in the size of the crowd and the enthusiasm of the crowd, even though they're going crazy for, what essentially is a regional independent promotion in 1994. The difference of that, and then compare that to a 2000, the year 2000 show at the ECW arena, where not only is the production a little bit better, not a ton, well, yeah, even for ECW, it's a ton better later on, but the amount of people that they would pack into that building is insane. I was only in that building once, and it was after the company closed down, and they did it was the second reunion at the ECW arena, the November Rain show. Actually, I won free tickets to that through Ringside Collectibles.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but so in 2005, when WWE did One Night Stand, Shane Douglas and I believe Axel Rotten and a handful of other people, they did their ECW arena show, which I think it might have even been the same weekend or the weekend after. I don't recall. And that was what got me back into wrestling after a few year hiatus. It was almost like ECW's closing killed my interest for wrestling for a little while, and the One Night Stand / ECW arena reunion shows made me, feel like I had to start paying attention again. So there was no chance when I found out that November they were doing another show, I was going to miss it. So instead of getting tickets, I tried to win free ones, of which I did, which was when I got there, I had to say I was on, what was that guy's name? Jeremy?
Borash?
Yes. I had to go there and just say, oh, I'm on Jeremy Borash's guest list, as if I knew him. I don't fucking know Jeremy Borash. It was just, that was the way they were doing their ticket giveaway. I never got like a fucking physical ticket. So we went there. I went with Tim Delaney, and it was insanely packed. Granted, I was saying how, the arena got crazy at the end of ECW, and this is 5 years afterwards. But even so, it was insanely packed. It was 1,000 degrees in there. Everybody was going fucking bonkers the entire time. So being there 5 years after the fact, I could only imagine. I've seen it on TV, but actually being there, I can only imagine what it was really like. It's a really, really important and special building. A very big chunk of wrestling history. So it is very cool, like you said, not just watching all these people, or a lot of these wrestlers that became major stars, not just in ECW, but in wrestling overall, in a way, I don't want to say they're infant stages, but they're younger stages, but it goes the same for the ECW crowd and the ECW arena.
Absolutely. Now, the next match features somebody who I feel like was already pretty established at this point, and maybe it's just because I definitely know who they are, and they didn't really change up their gimmick much throughout their careers. But the Public Enemy, Johnny Grunge and Rocco Rock, who I was super into as a stinker, they're facing Ron and Don Harris, who I think are going by the Bruise Brothers on this.
Yeah, they had 150 different names. The Bruise Brothers, the Blue Brothers, Jacob and Eli Blue. I don't recall if they were already in the WWF before this or after this as Jacob and Eli Blue with Dutch Mantel as their manager. you know, they were always a bit of I guess because they were big, huge twins, so they came in and seemed like a big deal no matter where they were right off the bat.
Yeah, this match is pretty cool, just because it's probably one of the more uh, cohesive matches on the show, which is funny because it's definitely like a no rules, not no rules, no disqualification. I guess no rules, no disqualification match. Which, of course, at the time, this is still Eastern Championship Wrestling, so that's not what all the matches are. They're not all no disqualification, kind of like they would go on to be. But it seemed like this one was the most contained out of all of them, maybe because Public Enemy was used to doing stuff like this. But out of, so this show has, I think, 8 or 9 matches, and there's really 3 probably that I would say really matter. But this one is a close runner-up as far as if you want to go back and watch the show, that you should check this out just to kind of see both of these teams in early stages, but still doing pretty similar work to what they would do for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, I think what you said is right. How Public Enemy, they were already established in ECW at this point, and it's kind of the first match where the crowd really cares about some of the wrestlers. I'm not saying that they didn't care about anyone prior, but Public Enemy was super over. And dude, they're so sick. Public Enemy is and was so sick. Did you know that the Harris brothers are fucking Nazis?
No, like in real
Yeah,
life?
yeah, they're straight up Nazis. I believe they have Nazi tattoos, and they were kind of blackballed after WCW closed because they are in fact Nazi guys. I've always thought their Bruise Brothers or Blue Brothers gimmick was, a little strange because, like I said, they're 2 big, huge twins, but they essentially are the Berserker without the helmet and the sword. Um, like they're wearing the same like Berserker shirt, and they have the same crazy, like Brody rip-off hair. But in this match, Rocco Rock is making them look better than they ever could have done on their own. Um, at one point, the Blues throw the world's worst clothesline over the top, so that's pretty laughable. I loved and hated this match at the same time. Like, it's cool because it's so much nonsense, but it sucks for the same reason.
Right.
But like same thing. Like at the time, all of this was insane, and all of it was like, yeah, this fucking rocks. Um, the finish was like super whatever, but like I said, so was the whole match. One of the Blues gets hit with a 2x4, and it's over. So I thought this whole entire match sucked, but I also thought it ruled in the way that it sucked.
Well, the next match is one of the 3, I guess, that I would say is worth checking out, but for all the wrong reasons, probably. Well, I guess there's some right reasons. That's not fair to say. But it's Jimmy Snuka, who is a seasoned veteran by 1994. I mean, I would even say he's way past his prime at this point.
He's
Uh,
probably about 85 years old here.
and he's facing a young Thomas Dreamer, who, of course, would go on to be one of the faces of ECW and is still a common face in wrestling today, even though his face is much fatter now, and I wish it would be hidden and go away, because I don't like him, but I know you do. I know a lot of people do. I'm not one of them. However, Jimmy Snuka just really beats the shit out of Tommy Dreamer for about 10 minutes. Tommy Dreamer kicks out of the Superfly Splash, and I was going to call him AJ Styles. What is that dude's name? Joey Styles really loses his mind over that. A Joey Styles. Hey, that's technically an A and a J. Um, Eden Styles' cousin really is freaking out over the fact that Snuka's splash is kicked out of, but Snuka just pounds him anyway, and then just keeps on beating the crap out of him after the match, if I'm not mistaken. And I've never been before, so I'm sure I'm right on the money there. But it's interesting, and I guess cool if you don't think Tommy Dreamer sucks, to see him back here, definitely sucking, but being a young suspender-wearing dork. And man, this match is so long. The second longest match on the show, only because the longest match on the show is an hour-long draw. But next to that one, it feels like it's a 2-hour-long draw. And I guess Snuka gets a lot of heat here. How much longer did he stick around with ECW?
He was never at the time. Nobody was quote unquote signed to ECW because it was just a regional independent promotion. So anybody who wrestled there was also making shots everywhere else or anywhere else that they could. I believe Snuka wasn't consistent in ECW much longer after this, but I definitely could be wrong. My memory for some of this stuff is so shot. But I do remember the first memory I have at all about ECW, like I said, was reading about it in Pro Wrestling Illustrated. But in the back of Pro Wrestling Illustrated, every month they would have a spread where they listed the top 10 of, I guess, what they considered like the most important promotions around. So they would obviously always make a big deal about WCW and WWF. But they would give a top 10 of Pacific Northwest Wrestling, the World Wrestling Council, etc. Eventually, ECW made it in there, and I remember seeing that. I guess it could have even gone back and forth over a course of a few months. Don Morocco and Jimmy Snuka being the world champion or being number one contender. I remember in 93 or 92 or even 94 being like so far removed from that. The only thing that I knew about Don, not new, but what I associated most with Don Morocco at that point was just old WWF VHS. And Jimmy Snuka hadn't been consistent in WWF since early 92, give or take. So to me, these guys were like, oh, I didn't know they still wrestled at all. I guess this is like the old-timers wrestling promotion or federation. We used to call every promotion a federation back then. So I remember seeing Snuka as either a world champion or number one contender, being like, oh, well, I guess he's still doing something somewhere. Seeing him not only as a heel, but he has so much heat with the fans. That's really cool, especially, like I said, in the 90s. I think it's hilarious that Dreamer is just this, like, unbelievable white meat babyface, like Tom Zenk, Johnny Gunn type of guy. And his way of getting over with the fans is to go outside of the ring and like converse and console the fan that Snuka is like beefing with the whole time. Take his hat, put his hat on, roll into the ring with the hat and be like, yeah, let's fucking fight now. That is just so like 90s and so indie. But at the same time, I love it. Now,
Isn't there a point where he straight up like picks up a child out of the crowd, like he's going to take them in the ring with him?
Yeah, he's doing the whole fucking presidential kissing babies and
shaking babies, kissing hands, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's funny to me. But anyone who's listened to us before knows I love Tommy Dreamer. I loved everything he did that I've seen throughout his entire career, but especially his original the ECW run. I always thought his character was cool. I love his in-ring work. He always had hot chicks with him. Oh, so check this out. Let's just go on a little bit of a sidebar. So a couple of years ago, I go to a House of Hardcore show, which is Tommy Dreamer's promotion. Does he run that with other people? I'm assuming
I think it's. Other people might be involved, but he's definitely the Paul Heyman of it,
Yeah. So I go to one of those shows, and it's great to see Tommy Dreamer, and Kurt Hawkins is there before he was Kurt Hawkins again. So it was while he was fired. Chris Hero was there. It was a good show. It was a lot of fun. So if you know me at all, you know that I'm hungry 24 hours a day. So at this like gymnasium in Queens, I'm like, fuck, I'm hungry, so I'm looking for anything to eat in there. So there's just a concession stand where they're selling like everything is garbage. So I'm like, all right, well, the least garbagey thing, which you'll scoff at, which I am also, is like fucking hot dogs. So I was like, all right, whatever, I'll get 2 hot dogs. So I go to order 2 hot dogs, and who is serving the hot dogs? Fucking Beulah, Mrs. Tommy Dreamer. So there's a couple of kids back there too, which I'm assuming are her and Tommy Dreamer's kids. So I wanted to be like, oh, Beulah, that's so cool. But instead, I just didn't say anything of that nature. So she's really sweet. Her face is still beautiful. She's a little older, and she's had a couple of kids, so she doesn't look like she did in the 90s, but she still looks good. And because I'm also like a stupid child teenager forever, I thought the irony of after, being exposed to Beulah in the mid to late 90s, which means I was, 14 through 19. So being exposed to Beulah there, and obviously her character, later on in life, her serving me a hot dog was funny. It's like a dick joke because she was so hot and her gimmick was that she was a porno chick. So that's cool, right? What do you like about it?
I don't know, man. All right, so after that, we got Pat Tanaka not coming out to the Goldberg music he would use in WCW.
That's in my notes. That's probably the biggest bummer of the show.
And the Sheik versus Kevin Sullivan and the Tasmaniac, who would go on to be, as we all know, part of the announce team for SmackDown. And they have a short match that I guess is a match. I don't even know how or why it ends. I know there's a fireball that the camera doesn't even catch. And, man, it's just... this whole show is so cool. But what'd you think about seeing these guys on the big screen?
Oh, there's lots of fucked up shit in here. Yo, during the announcement, the introduction for Kevin Sullivan, that dance he's doing, just fucking swinging his legs around like Forrest Gump teaching Elvis how to dance. Weird that he's doing that dance. You know what else? I never understood Kevin Sullivan yelling "Huss." I guess that's another I'm crazy too. I'm like Bruiser Brody also, so I just yell "Huss" like he does. To be honest, aside from his initial, devil gimmick and his Dungeon of Doom cartoon version of a devil gimmick, I have never exactly understood what Kevin Sullivan's gimmick was. You know what I mean? Like, if he kind of chose to be, I'm just a really short dude from Boston, and I take no shit, and I'm gonna kick people's asses, I would have preferred that to like being in and out of like, oh well, I'm like a smart mastermind, to like, well, I'm just crazy and I don't know anything, to like, oh, I hang out with weird people in the Dungeon of Doom, and years before that, I hung out with weird people like Cactus Jack and Norman the Lunatic. And then later on, like, oh, yeah, remember Woman from WCW this whole time? That's my real wife. Why you fucking her, Chris Benoit? You're going to kill her later.
Now, see, after watching this match, I'm under the theory that Nancy Benoit watched the video head system cassette tape of this show, saw Kevin Sullivan's disgusting mayonnaise thighs, remembered that she used to bang him, killed Chris Benoit and herself and her son so he could never see it, and that's the real conspiracy of the Benoit murders.
Do you see that Chris Benoit's living son has no wrestling training or anything but wants to get in the business, so all of a sudden, like, all the promotions are, like, taking notice of it already? That might be, like, the internet playing tricks on people. Like, that's not the case, that people are paying attention to it. But it seemed like there was already a debate where, like, AEW shouldn't pay attention to Benoit's son just because he's Benoit's son. He has no training. And then people being like, oh, they got to sign him. It would make as much sense to sign Roddy Piper's daughter, I guess. But.
I was going to say, I mean, they've already done this trick. I don't see why they wouldn't do it. WCW signed David Flair.
Okay, legit, I liked every single thing about David Flair's WCW run.
So did I, but that doesn't change the fact that he got signed with no experience and just nepotism, which I think is sick. I think if you're going to have connections like that, you should use them. But and David Flair got to smash Stacy Keibler, right?
Yeah, that guy is cool as hell. I'm just so used to, speaking to my friends about things, and then when I speak to wrestling people that I'm not like closely acquainted to. Apparently, some people are really sensitive about not just talking about Chris Benoit and Chris Benoit matches, but they're really sensitive to like the shitty Chris Benoit jokes, which I understand as like a regular human. I'm just not used to being a regular human. I guess I'm used to just like anything that ever happened is fair game for like jokes and have fun with it. I've never had any problem making Chris Benoit jokes or fully enjoying and loving Chris Benoit matches and stuff still out. So that's just a little interesting thing to me, being that the conversation led that way somehow. This match is complete garbage. The Sheik looks so terrible, but he also throws Hadouken, and that's
Yeah.
the finish. Calling Pat Tanaka Patrick Tanaka is so funny. I don't know why, but Pat Tanaka sounds like a kung fu villain or a kung fu hero or a member of the tag team, the Orient Express. When they call him Patrick, I want them to call him Patrick O. Tanaka and have him be kind of like a Jimmy Yang Wang version of like Finley. Like that would be funny, right?
Yeah.
Do you remember Jimmy Yang Wang?
I vividly remember him. I also remember that the guy that played Mr. Miyagi in the Karate Kid movies was named Pat. So that's what I always thought when I saw Pat Tanaka. In fact, I always assumed that that's why they named him that, was after him.
Everybody in this match looks like shit. It's awesome.
All right, so that leads us to probably the most worthy of discussion segment on the whole show, besides, of course, the main event that is supposedly historical. But JT Smith faces off against a fat Mike Awesome. Mike Awesome, of course, rules. He's appropriately named. I don't even care that he almost killed Shaggy Two Dope of the Insane Clown Posse by awesome bombing him on top of a Partridge Family school bus. But the thing that's incredible about this match is there's a moment where after the match, okay, actually during the match, he does a plancha onto this dude, JT Smith, that he's facing. And from what you told me, literally breaks JT Smith's back on the guardrail. Is that true?
Oh, he crunched him. Unless it has been this like 30-year kayfabe that's like gotten us all. I've always been under the impression that that was the legit back break of JT Smith, which is fucking crazy because I remember that's been played over and over again forever, especially when Mike Awesome came back in the late 90s and won the ECW World Championship. I had no recollection whatsoever of JT Smith winning this match. And I also had no recollection of the fucking top rope snapping. It's just so goddamn funny. That's like one of the best like wrestle botch things I've ever seen in my life. And I must have seen it before because I've seen this show, but I don't remember it at all.
Those of you that haven't seen it, what happens is after the match, after Mike Awesome somehow loses to the guy with the broken back in 2 minutes, if that, might even be less than 2 minutes, Mike Awesome beats up the referee and gets on top of the turn. And remember, Mike Awesome is fat, so he's like over 300 pounds in this match for sure. Gets on top of the top turnbuckle to like jump off and splash him probably, but the turnbuckle collapses, so he just falls flat on his face. Lays there for a good minute, wakes up.
He sells it. It's so great.
He's pissed, so he just grabs the broken turnbuckle, the little turnbuckle pad, and throws it at the referee and leaves.
He throws a fucking temper tantrum. It's so cool. Yo, how about when they announce him, the introduction, it's Awesome Mike Awesome. Yeah, what a cool fucking name. That guy's the best. Really, really such a bummer that he killed himself. Apparently he had like obviously very severe depression, and it went crazy.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's sad. What a talent, man. I really, really liked Mike Awesome. In my early ECW viewing, he wasn't really there. So it was just kind of like, oh, this guy, Mike Awesome, he's huge. He has a giant mullet. Like, he jumps off the top rope, which, back then, 300-pound guys that, match up more with Sid than they would like Bam Bam Bigelow. They didn't do shit like jumping off the top rope, even though that's a bad example because Bam Bam Bigelow jumped off the top rope. But then when he came back in the late 90s and was leaner, I don't know if he was meaner. He looks like a big smiley baby. But he was just sick. Those matches he had with Tanaka, not Pat Tanaka,
Masato Tanaka.
Tanaka. Those were just legendary. They would just kick the shit out of each other and do these, mix awesome wrestling, awesome, with just crazy ECW style hardcore stuff. And WCW just misused him so terribly. And when he came back for One Night Stand, the crowd was, just shitting on him because of the whole leaving ECW with the title and going to WCW, yada yada. If you don't know what that's about, look it up. I'm talking too much this show. So he had heat with the WWE crowd, and by the end of his match at One Night Stand, the crowd was like, "This guy is awesome. He does great work. He's, putting his body on the line for our entertainment for the sake of the match, and he won everybody over." And I feel like that's a really tough thing to win over the WWE / original ECW crowd coming in for an ECW reunion. So they're just like full of piss and vinegar and want to have fun, but want to shit on anything that's not just originally and indicatively ECW. And it says so much about his work. That guy was awesome. Real shame.
Yeah, definitely a guy who could do anything with anything, doing that 70s guy, Mike Awesome in WCW, which should be like a career killer, yet he made it really cool. I mean, like you said, what a talent. I hate to use that phrase because it sounds like one of those buzz phrases that people just say about, but I mean, guy could legitimately do it all, was gigantic, was funny, was crazy, incredibly athletic, and super sad that he had a career cut short due to that depression. But not as depressed as I felt I was during the 60-minute draw for the ECW championship between Terrence Funk, Shane Douglas, and Sabu, the suicidal, homicidal, sociopathic, upside down, psychopathic records, mayhem, monster, jam, Sabu, son of the, not son, grandson, nephew of the original Sheik. And yeah, man. So like you said, that this match I guess was historic because it was one of the first triple threat matches in North America. I definitely can't think of a three-way championship match in WWF until like 96, 97. So this definitely predates that by several years. But Jesus Christ, it felt like it never ended. It lasted for an hour and felt like every moment of that hour. And so again, cool to look back and know that it set a precedent, but a bummer to look back and have to actually sit through watching that precedent be set.
Yeah, it's kind of unfortunate, something that's been built up in your memory or built up even before memory. Like I said, this match was built up for years before I saw it. And then by the time I saw it, I remember it being like, oh, this is like the sickest show. But like I said, even 5 or 6 or 7 years after this show, it still seemed like something groundbreaking. And like watching or listening to your current favorite band's demo. So it's not polished, but you could see where it's leading to. Where this show now is just, it's like generations past. And it shows during this. I don't remember it feeling like it was such a long match, like you said, but it absolutely does. Not that long ago, I mean, I've seen the match I'm about to reference a lot also, probably a good 7 or 8 or 20 times. But my last viewing of the Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart, WrestleMania 12 Iron Man match, that match, to me, still holds up and doesn't drag and doesn't seem dated. So, and this is only, 2 years prior, 2.5, yeah, just about 2 years prior. I really like the cool jump start with Sherry and Paulie. I think Terry Funk's work is typical Terry Funk, and it was so groundbreaking to take it to the next level for ECW at the time. But like I said, in retrospect, it's a bit underwhelming. Very, very much the same with Sabu. The story and the character build is undeniable. But even just what Sabu became a couple years later, this doesn't hold up to it. In some ways, I was thinking maybe the camera work makes it seem less astonishing as it all is. Like I said, even the '96 WrestleMania match with Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, that's a multi-camera $1 million product. It's still WrestleMania and all this shit. Where this is essentially, a dude with an expensive video camera for 1994. Sabu is continuously fucking up due to the ring conditions, which is like endearing, but also like, oh man, it just takes. In some ways, it takes you out of the match over and over again every time Sabu is trying to do something and he fucks it up. Especially now, knowing what he's going for. Like back then, you might not have really known exactly what he was going for. You just know he's trying to do something crazy. Right now, like, oh, he's going for like a triple jump moonsault. You've seen it done a trillion times. So when he goes to do it and like the fucking ropes, he like slips on the second rope. It's like, ugh, God. Sensational Sherry is taking bumps all night. So I think she is a big part of this match that kind of gets, I don't want to say left out of history, but I don't think she gets the credit for this match that she deserves. But in all actuality, I think that's her entire career. She spent her entire career making everybody else look great and just adding like a little like taste here and there to matches where if you take it out, an entire match can go from like, oh, that match was like an 8, for example, and you take out her little sprinkle and the match could be a 5. This might be a stupid analogy, but she's kind of almost like when you're cooking a meal, she's like the salt. I know you don't eat dead animals, but I eat chicken. I could eat a plain chicken. Just put a chicken breast in the oven and just heat it up and then eat it. And like, all right, I'm fine with that. But when my girlfriend cooks and she's putting all this shit on it, sometimes she's like, well, at least let me put some salt on it. And she'll do it. And then we're eating that chicken. I'm like, wow, this tastes like really good chicken. It's like, oh, the fucking sprinkle of salt. That's a shitty analogy, but at least it makes a little bit of sense.
I like that because I don't eat meat. I don't know what the benefits of salt. I like how that starts.
Yeah, they make salt out of chickens. That's why it goes so well with chicken. But the entire finish of this match, if you even call it a finish because it's a time limit draw, it's just a complete mishmash. So, I mean, the main thing that I take out of this match, even though I just gushed over how good I think Sensational Sherry is, the main thing I take out of this is that Shane Douglas is a fucking wrestling machine and like a complete warrior to me. I know there's lots of conflicting opinions on Shane Douglas, and that's not just from, people in the business, of which we're not, but stupid fans like us, two mark-ass marks. Depending on your exposure or the period of time you focus on, some people think Shane's the greatest thing in the world, and some people think he's a complete hack. There's a very, very, very short period in time that I don't think Shane Douglas is just stellar. And that even goes from my initial exposure to Shane was the tail end of his Dynamic Dudes run, where him and Johnny Ace were skateboarders when they didn't actually ride the skateboard. It was very, very short-lived where I was watching WCW and they were still on TV, where it's like, oh, it's just a good guy tag team. You know, it was 1990, so two young blonde guys throwing drop kicks, like, oh, cool. You know, I didn't know any better. But then Shane Douglas goes to WWF at the end of 1990 and has a very quick, you know, maybe a 3-month run. He has a great performance in the Royal Rumble of 1991. I was like, I really like this guy. You know, I like his in-ring work. He has a very cool move set, and I like that he was just a young, you know, I'm new and I'm young, but I'm trying my best babyface. He winds up back in WCW. He's doing singles. He winds up tagging eventually and has great success tagging with Rick Steamboat. And they become the WCW and NWA tag team champions. And I really liked that team, and I really liked all the programs they had, specifically with Brian Pillman and Steve Austin, just before and during the whole Hollywood Blondes deal. And that's when Shane started doing the belly-to-belly as his finisher. And that was a finisher that was, in WWF, nobody even really did a belly-to-belly, but it definitely wasn't a finisher if they did it. In WCW, belly-to-belly was always a finisher, so I loved that he was using that. So he disappears mid-93, and then I eventually find out, like I said, through the magazines, that not only is he in this other promotion called ECW, but he's like a top guy, and he's a bad guy. And I just can't wrap my brain around that for like years and years. Eventually, I discovered ECW, and I see all this, and you know, he's in WWF, he's in ECW, he goes to WCW, he's all over the place. Once he leaves ECW, goes to WWF and does the Dean Douglas gimmick, of which I hated, and I didn't like his work, and then he goes back to ECW. That is when he really, really hit his stride, but it was him taking the character that was established, in my opinion, at this show, as he's the only one who does all 60 minutes of this match. You know, you see Sabu was out for a lot of it. Terry Funk was out for a lot of it. And even more so, the promo that he does after this match is just everything that I want out of Shane Douglas. You know, he's a shitty heel, but the reason why he's a heel is because he's going to say whatever is on his mind, and he's going to be really aggressive about it all the time. You know, of course, he falls into the other tropes, like he'll break rules, and, you know, he does the chicken shit heel by having factions and all this shit sometimes. But when it comes down to it, his in-ring work, you get him in the ring, most likely he's going to kick your ass. And I just, man. So, like I said, this time period set the groundwork for it. You know, but his 96, 97, 98, I believe he was in ECW. I don't remember if he left in 98 or 99. But, man, that whole section of time, people might think I'm crazy for saying this, but I think that section of time, he is, in my top 20 and maybe even in my top 15 of all time.
Well, that is high praise for Shane Douglas, and you can go back and see a glimpse into the future from the past on ECW's The Night the Line Was Crossed. It is available on the World Wrestling Entertainment Network. It's probably also available on YouTube.commercial if you aren't a network subscriber. But if you're listening to two dorks like us talk about wrestling, you probably have the WWE Network, so I'm going to encourage you to check that out briefly so you'll know that everything I said on this show was correct. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Retro Review number 2 of ECW's The Night the Line Was Crossed. Stay tuned for more content here on the YouTube channel for more retro reviews. And of course, we have our regular weekly podcast about the modern going-ons in pro graps history, as far as Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Stiff Shots Podcast. Thanks for coming out. We'll see you up there. Rockstar rules. Amazon drools. Bye.
Goodbye.